Hmm.
Yvonne, we're ready to get started whenever you are.
Oh, you want me to, okay, lovely. Okay, so greetings everybody and welcome to this discussion element of African Apocalypse. My name's Yvonne Conakey and I am the founder of Cinema Galau. So I want to begin, first of all, by thanking the New Black Film Collective, the film and television charity, Chapter Cinema, and the team of African Apocalypse. We also want to thank the Bertha Foundation, the BFI Doc Society Fund, and BBC Arena. So thank you to all of our sponsors. And I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce my panel guests tonight. Greetings, panel. First of all, I'd like to introduce Latifa. Is Latifa with us? Not yet. Okay. Latifa's not with us, but Onismo Malanga is with us, who was going to step in for us at the last minute. Thank you very much, Onismo. Onismo is a filmmaker and a journalist and a social worker who's been working in Newport now for some years and is a native of Zimbabwe. So thank you very much for stepping in, Onismo. It's really lovely to see you. We also have the wonderful Abu Bakar. He is Abu Bakar Madden, who is an educational consultant and comparative sociologist. He's a historian in Black and African experience from prehistory to contemporary. The past 9 years, Abu has run a successful Black History Studies program at Cardiff University and is now a visiting senior fellow lecturer for the Cardiff School of Social Scientists in Race and Education and Staff Developmental Training. He's a public academic. He works tirelessly for Black History Month Wales, and he has also founded his own company looking into childhood development and parenting skills for the ACAP Academy, CIC. Now, if you want to study with Abu, there are many courses you can take. They include educational psychology, childhood development, gang culture and violence, multicultural Britain, history on race and genetics, kingdoms of Mother Africa, the struggle for Black rights, 16,000 AD to 2009 AD, and the rise and fall of the Moorish Islamic empires, 300 BCE to 1492 AD. So that's a kind of beginning range of the things you will learn if you are able to go along to any of the courses. Also, Fez is here. Thank you very much for coming tonight, Fez. Fez is our local champion in Newport, someone I've known for a very, very long time, very, always impressed by his work and admire him very much. Fez is a filmmaker and an educator for some 10 years in Wales. He's known as Fez, but he was born Mohammed Maya in Southampton, England, and went on to pursue photographic reportage from the age of 15, and today supports a multiple range of Black-owned agencies in delivering communication strategies as well as community development skills to fellow creatives and practitioners. His recent work includes working closely with community groups surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as developing advocacy projects for marginalized and rural communities. So welcome to you, Fez. And Andrew, last but not least, Ogun is with us today. Andrew Ogun is a 22-year-old writer, musician, poet, activist, creative director, and he lives in Newport with us, you know, I'm saying the royal us now, the Newport people. Andrew recently graduated from the University of Birmingham with a first-class degree in English literature and is currently studying for a master's in fashion Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the University of Arts in London. So welcome to you all. I want to also thank Femi Nalanda, the director, for being with us, and Rod Lemkin, the producer, for being with us as well. So thank you so much, guys, for giving us this opportunity to really, talk to you about the work, about the film, about the whole experience. One of the things I always say to people, Femi, when they've made a film like this is, are you happy with it? Are you happy with the film you made?
Hi, nice to meet you all.
Oh,
Quick correction.
Yeah.
I'm actually the co-writer and obviously the character within. Rob is the director, and then there's another guy who's the producer.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome. No one's perfect. I do apologise.
No worries. So just remind me of the question again.
No, I always ask. The first thing I always ask is that the film you wanted to make? Are you happy with it?
Indeed, I think it is. I think you're always struggling when you kind of have a lot of pies, a lot of fingers in the pie, and a lot of different funders and this, that, the rest. And sometimes you get restrained, and sometimes you don't make the film you want to make because you don't go on the journey you're expected to go on.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't make the film you want to make because you're not allowed to. And both of those hurdles were overcome. And I think both myself and Rob from the beginning, we've both had a very similar vision of the story we want to tell and the things that we want to come out. And I think that it was very successful in doing those things and sparking those conversations. And it was very lucky that as we were kind of putting together the final bits of the film, the topic of colonialism became a global kind of buzzword. And we were able to tie that into the modern kind of resurgence of colonial discussion.
Brilliant. So I want to get a response as well from the panel just to see how everyone's feeling about it. I mean, you guys have seen the film now. Can I ask you, Abu, first, only because you're to my extreme right and I can go that way on my screen. So can I ask you, Abu, what are your first thoughts about the film? How are you feeling about it?
Well, I saw the film. I only saw about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes of it because I did have technical problems. And hello, Femi. Nice to see that you were behind the film. We did a presentation together at Bristol University a few years ago. I'm not sure if you can remember. But it's nice to see that you're being active and you're trying to bring out the narrative of, Black and African people and try to give the contemporary feel, especially in the arts. The thing I'd like to find out from you, Femi, how long did it take you to write, the script, etc.? How long did the editing take? And how long did the actual filming take as well? I'd like to know about that because it was well put together. Obviously, there was quite a few people which was working behind the scenes, etc. So if you can give me a little breakdown of the durational periods of each one of those three things I just mentioned.
So the script actually was based on another script that Rob had been working on before we'd even met. Rob had this film envisaged as a fictional film, which just kind of recounted the story of Voulet. At the same time as Rob was doing that, I was a student at Oxford University and I was working on Rhodes Must Fall and the movement about Cecil Rhodes and colonialism there. After I graduated, and after Rob had kind of been working on the concept for some years in a very, very different formation, we then met and the film took a very different shape insofar as it still kind of followed the same journey as the fictional journey, which I'm sure he can tell you about himself, would have taken. But it became a much more personal trip in which my own thoughts about colonialism, my own personal history, and my own reaction to the mission of Voulet became a lot clearer. Like I said, the fact that we actually went January of 2019, which means that between now and then it's been almost 2 years of edit, including lots of translation issues and this, that, the rest. But as I say, it's very lucky that the process, because of various hurdles, has taken so long because it's come out at a very relevant time. I mean, what do you have to add to that, Rob? Well, the one thing I would say before I hand over to Rob is that in terms of the writing, on my side, in terms of the narration, I felt that very strongly that I should be talking directly to this guy, this Paul Voulet, and you'll have heard through the narration throughout the film that it's me saying, Paul, I'm coming to get you. Paul, you've done this. Paul, and I feel as though that narrative style, that direct addressing to almost the antagonist of the story, although the antagonist generally is actually European colonialism, not just this one individual, but the idea that you have this antagonist who I can address personally and who I'm tracking down, I think allows it to become more drama while still retaining the documentary side and keeping some of that initial fictionary element that Rob had in his initial script, whilst keeping true to the actual story and the fact that it is at the heart of it a documentary. And I think that was a very interesting thing to explore when doing the narration side of things. Rob, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, hello everyone. Yeah, I think, and greetings to everybody in Newport. It's where my parents-in-law live, so I spend quite a lot of time there. It's where my partner, my wife, is from Newport, so I know it well. And I was just there just last week, actually, a couple of times. So hello everybody in Newport, and I look forward to meeting you all in the flesh when conditions allow us to do such things. Yeah, in terms of shooting the film, as you can probably see, Abu Bakr, it was kind of, Niger is a difficult place to operate. For example, you wouldn't really be able to leave Niamey, the capital, without permission from the government, because it's a place where there is quite a lot of insecurity for anybody who is not from Niger. You know, if you're white like I am, then you really stand out. But actually, anybody coming from another country going to Niger and wanting to travel across, it's a difficult situation. There's been a lot of kidnapping there. There's been, in fact, along the road that we made the center of the journey that Femi and I took, which is the road that this character Voulet took when he invaded the country. Well, he didn't take a road. He made his own journey across the country in order to try and take control of it. When you go across that road, in fact, just not only a couple of months ago, there was a lot of violence, a lot of some units, if you can call them units, of Boko Haram came across the border from Nigeria and killed a lot of people, killed a lot of Nigerian people, and also killed 6 French aid workers who happened to be there. And that was right on the road where we were filming. If we had tried, it's now December, and so this period, December and January and February, maybe November to February is the time when you can film in Niger, because it's not so hot, and it's possible to get a lot of energy both within your own filming unit, but also within the communities and people that you're working with. Otherwise, it's really too hot to be doing the kind of difficult things that filming involves. But if we were trying to go there now, I think we wouldn't be allowed to go there, because the country is under a kind of another kind of lockdown, not a coronavirus lockdown, but a security lockdown. So that's kind of dangerous. But the way that we worked, I mean, as Femi said, I did go to Niger just before I met him, about a year before I met him, and I made the journey across the road as a sort of first trial to see what the research, to research the journey and see what it would involve. And then when we were given the kind of money and the go ahead to be able to do it through the BBC and the British Film Institute and so on, then I went again, and then we went a third time, which was the time that Femi and I went, and that was the time that we did the bulk of the filming. But I think the result was that, having gone there twice, and I was working very closely with the Nigerian cinema community there, which is quite developed. There's a lot of Amina Wera, who's in the film, is a really good filmmaker in her own right, and so we were kind of quite familiar and reasonably well known to the communities there in the villages and towns across the country. And that was quite important, because I think had we just turned up the first time, you know, with a film crew and myself and Femi, I think we would have encountered a lot of obstacles. What you see in the film is actually the result of a huge participation. You know, many of the things that you see in this film are actually really were a participation of us as a film crew, not just a film crew from Europe. I mean, Femi and I are from Britain. There was a French camera team, there was a Dutch producer, but actually many Nigerian people working with us. So we had Nigerian co-producers, we had lots of people working with us. And the kind of trust and rapport that we had with the communities across the country was, I think, pretty, you know, about as deep as we could manage by just going there a few times. For example, when the Sultan of Bernin-Conny you know, arranges a big kind of carnival, and everybody turns up, and there's a lot of dancing and performing, and, you know, Femi takes part in it by singing his song and all that kind of thing. That was something that had been, you know, arranged between us and the Sultan beforehand, and he decided that, in fact, he decided to postpone his own trip, his own Hajj pilgrimage, because he was due to do that. So he actually put that to one side and said, yeah, we'll work together. So much of what you see in the film, and of course there are many scenes that we filmed that we didn't put in the film, unfortunately, because all films can include all the things that you didn't manage to put in. Many of those scenes are ones that I think were the result of a lot of cooperation, a lot of deep connection, even so deep that actually, while we've been on the phone now, I've just been getting WhatsApp messages from a couple of people who are in the film in Niger telling me, one of them's just stood for a local council, and he's just telling me he's just got in. So, you know, the latest is kind of coming in. This is like from the election a couple of days ago.
Albert Camus.
So our relationship is close with these people, and I think that was something that was kind of important because without that, it would have been, you know, a very superficial trip. Of course, added to that, as you see in the film, we had to also work with a lot of military security, because otherwise we would be in a certain amount of danger. But that, of course, that military security was supported by the government, and that was part of the way that we had to work. And that kind of involvement continues, as I say, like I've been getting WhatsApp messages just coincidentally while we've been on now, but that involvement continues and will continue, because I think one of the big hopes, one of the big kind of end results of this film will be to take it to Niger. And some people have seen it there, but it hasn't really been shown in the towns and villages where we filmed. So we look forward to being able to show people and see what they think, and probably show them a slightly different version from the one that was been made here in the UK, and try and use other bits that we weren't able to get in from here. But I think hopefully it will be a very kind of exciting archive for people to feel that they can get a lot from going forward in the future. That's in terms of the Nigerian communities that we work with.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Thanks for that, and thanks, Femi, as well.
The guy who got in for local council, I believe, is one of the guys in the film. If you remember the scene in Junju where someone is talking to me about Albert Camus and is saying that we can never forgive the French.
Yes.
He's been telling me as well about his his bid for councilship. So I'm pretty sure it's him that Rob's talking about. So very good guy.
Cool. I wanted to ask Andrew a question, actually. He's just gone off camera. Are you coming back, Andrew? Yeah, you are. You're having a walk around. I wanted to talk to you a little about it, because you know, you're running the Black Lives Matter movement in Newport at the moment, and the whole themes. The beauty of this film is that it's kind of like a kind of postmodern sixth form movie to me, because it has all of the elements that you need for A-level. It's got Heart of Darkness. It's got all of the, you know, all the work with Paul, the interaction between Femi and Paul as a narrative. There's so many ways you can pick this film apart and be, you know, just straight educated by it, but from a very kind of postmodern point of view. I just wondered how useful a film like this is going to be in the work that you're doing right now.
I think for me, it goes back to the sense of when we think about history and we think of it in such a way that is linear and in such a way that it's X happens and then Y and then X and then Y. And a lot of the times then things that don't make that particular canon obviously get buried in the dirt and forgotten about, because I came into this film, I had no idea about who Voulet was. I did not know anything about this particular story, and seeing how kind of profound of an experience it was for the Nigerians, you know, even the scene when you were Femi was talking to the girls in the school.
Yeah.
And they were all, you know, documenting great grandparents and family members who were affected by that, and seeing the kind of visceral impact of that, and thinking this is something I had no clue about, but to this community of people, this is such a staple of their country, of their nation. It was very heavy. It was heavy, you know, it was heavy viewing. And I think what I liked about the film was the approach to storytelling. I thought was very unique, in the sense of I liked the way Femi was speaking directly to Voulet, and I liked the way it kind of embeds and imbues Conrad's novel as well. Because that's a novel I remember reading it, and it having a very profound effect on me when I first read it. So I think it's a very kind of fascinating way to tell a story, and a lot of the times that directness of Femi's narration was, I think, what was needed to kind of anchor and ground what we were seeing. It had to be a direct address. It had to be him speaking directly to Voulet for it to have the impact that it did. Right. So that's kind of how I felt.
Okay, so I want to kind of open it up a little bit. I'd like you to ask a few questions now, Niz, because I know that you have a younger approach. You know, I'm like a grandmother to you, and I'd really like you to kind of like, you know, just vibe up the thing and say perhaps how you feel, or if there's any questions you want to ask Femi or Fez, because I haven't spoken to Fez yet, or you know, just give it your own flavour.
Yeah, well, I'm glad what Andrew just said that, and to echo that. But first, hello everybody. It's nice to see the faces that I can see and hear the voices that I can hear. But I definitely want to echo what Andrew was just saying about how kind of vigorous it was as a narrative, and that aspect which even Rob just touched on alongside Femi as well, of emotionally and kind of narratively addressing Voulet through it. That in itself is very, very strong, and it makes it feel like we're also addressing Voulet. Exactly. From viewing what we're viewing and seeing what we're seeing from my perspective, it felt like I'm addressing him, because I felt whatever was being the conversations that were kind of being showcased and that they were available for us to see. I could feel it through the screen, and that's why I really kind of felt connected with this. And I feel like kind of the younger generation, or anybody who's watching, anybody that can attach themselves to the story, would be able to feel that sense of emotion. And it impels them to want to ask more questions, impels them to find out what else is kind of hidden at the same time as what I'm always thinking, which goes over into the question is how do we adjourn an understanding, or the access point of understanding something like this, and putting it into a form of action beyond the thought. So Femi, or even yourself, Rob, how do we adjourn this into a form of action that is past the dialogue? Because we've had multiple amounts of access point, and this is why this was fantastic, because it assisted the access points that have been put in place that allows us to open up the dialogue. But then it's looking further beyond the dialogue. And what would you say? And this could be to the panel as well, actually.
Just on the point, because both of you have raised it about the direct addressing, one of the actual kind of not arguments, but one of the things that we had to push for against the kind of BBC's insistence was calling him Paul, because that brings it even personal level. They were like, okay, you can address him directly, but at least call him Voulet. At least give him the respect of calling him Voulet. At least establish him as this Voulet guy. I was like, no, I want to call this guy Paul. I don't want to even give him the respect to giving him his full name. I want to be saying, okay, Paul, because it's kind of taunting him, right? And to bring it to that level, we initially got back from the BBC and the BFI, and I was like, no, I want to call him Paul. I'm keeping it.
Yeah.
And it's been one of the things that people have liked. But yeah, I think that in terms of keeping the authenticity of the narrative, it's all for me about widening the access point and not making it too academic in that sense, and not just academic in the sense of it's not an essay, and therefore it's going to be a documentary, because even documentaries, only certain type of people are going to be drawn to documentaries, right? And I think the most important thing was finding that balance between truthfulness in the documentary style and a film that is more a film and fictional. And I think one of the things that sometimes led to tension between me and Rob is me having to view myself as a character, as someone with a character arc, and not just as myself, me having to be like, okay, cool, okay, even having to, cool. One of the biggest scenes in the film, which has become a talking point, is the scene where I'm confronted by my guides, Amina and Hassan, right? And I didn't know we were going to that cafe. We're going to sit down and we're going to have a deep heart to heart. I thought we're just going for a drink, right? It's like, oh no, cameras are out, turning point, big confrontational moment about your character arc, and I'm like, okay, cool. And then even in the editing process, right, it's like, okay, cool, we're gonna. But I mean, I was fine with including that scene because I understand that it helps to bring that personal aspect of the journey through, that allows it to show it's a development, because you can't just have it because the personal development of how someone is interacting with this story is part of what brings the story out, and it's part of what makes the story compelling and palatable to a wider audience. And the thrust of this film has to be getting as many people as possible to hear about this story and to know this history of who this guy was, and what, not just who this guy was, but what France did, and what Europe as a wider entity did.
Just if I could just add one thing, which is just to like also pick up on what you said on Ismo, is like, you know, how do you turn this into action? Because it's all very well for everyone to watch a film and then, oh yeah, well that's all very interesting, but what are you going to do? You know, because the world is still in a bad place, and we need to do something about it. We need to sort of we need to use this film to somehow make its somehow kind of galvanize people to change the balances of power in the world, so that these kind of things, you know, are very much history and not the present, and that actually the future is something that's got to be much more emancipatory for everyone. I think that to that extent, you know, I do wish that we'd been able to find a story that was as compelling, that connected to British imperial history, because we would be able to have a very direct thing that we could go forward with. I think in France, when the film comes out there, I hope, and in fact, the person that Femi and I are just talking about, Hosseini Tahiru, the guy who's in the first village in Junju that we go to, he is part of a group that is interested in bringing a legal case against the French state for reparations for what has been done, because not only has the French state never apologized for Voulet, they covered up what he did for many, many decades. You know, it's only really in the last few years that some of this material has really been known about. But they certainly have continued to exploit the country in the same way, in the way that we show in the film. The country is regarded as a place where essentially France can be electrified through uranium, but with no interest for the Nigerian citizens who still, most of whom don't have electricity. I think it's like 10% of the population have access to electricity. There is a kind of, since the Black Lives Matter upsurge in the rising in the summer of this year, there has been a move in France to start to look at colonial crimes in Algeria, and President Macron has opened an investigation, but it's actually being run by a French historian. Many Algerian historians and many people in France and in Algeria are saying, well, why is a French historian looking into this stuff? This should be looked into by Algerians. I think the same is the case in Niger. Niger, even in France, even though France was the colonial country that took over Niger, even in France, Niger is not such a well-known country. It's not so high profile. So I hope that this film may be able to lead to some kind of something really, really tangible, like a legal action. The Sultan of Bernin-Koni says if Voulez had done this now, he would be taken to the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and there would be a trial. Well, the trial would be good because that would be justice, but to be honest, even still, Nigerian people would still be living in massive poverty, and there would be incredible lack of resources there and infrastructure there. So I think in terms of Niger and France, I hope that this film might in due course lead to some kind of be helpful in terms of some kind of genuine legal political struggle that could actually kind of begin to start to get reparations. And I think maybe as a film in this country, it would be great if similar kinds of things could be done in relation to what happened here. I mean, even just this weekend, we have the story of the man and MP in Dorset, who's a multimillionaire and whose family made all their money from slave owning in, I think in Jamaica, Trinidad, I think it was. This guy is still, he's a Conservative MP, and he's been allowed to flourish and live in a huge kind of country sort of state mansion and have a huge, I think he owns something like 400 or 200 properties in the UK. Is one of the, I think he's the biggest landlord in the Houses of Parliament. So I think there are many cases in the UK where the British imperial sort of history needs to be, not just talked about, but actually some action needs to be taken about. And I hope that, maybe, I don't know whether this film can lead to that, but maybe with the help of the BFI and the BBC and all of you and everybody, all of us together, and Black Lives Matter, maybe we can begin to kind of get a focus on what various campaigns can be done. And if there are loads and loads of campaigns being done all over Britain to do with lots of different things that connect with people, what people experience in terms of dispossession, in terms of, stuff that's led to the bad situation that we're in at the moment, then I think that would be good. I also think, I also heard that the film could be used as an educational resource, but that's education. I think, as you say, action is the most important, especially at this time, because we really need to make sure that the energy coming from the Black Lives Matter uprising that has been happening over the last few months across the world needs to keep going. It mustn't run out of steam.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to ask a very quick question to Fez before I turn it over to our audience. Thank you for being so patient, and I hope you have enjoyed the discussion so far. But Fez, you are, after all, a major leader now in Newport when it comes to young people and their education. And I mean, we both know that when it comes to, going right to the street, people do have a desire, but they don't always have access. Access is always the biggest problem. So how are we going to make these things happen? How can we actually bring these types of films to young people, young working class people, black and white, who have got the right attitude, and really inspire them to be able to empower their own lives and empower the lives of others? I mean, what are the sort of things you're thinking about right now when you after watching a film like that? It's hard, isn't it?
I mean, I've watched it twice now. I watched it the first time about a week ago. I was just glued to the couch afterwards, just in a pool of sweat. It was so intense. And the second time around, I kind of disseminated a bit more of the information and a bit more of the kind of what was being said and the actual factual historic record that was being referenced. And I think what I can't really, I'm trying to avoid regurgitating what other people have said as well, is what I found interesting about the film, and I think what would be something to work upon, is in film, we're taught that film is a empathy machine, right? It encourages us to increase our line of sight of empathy. We can see more. We can only care for things that we can see. But I think Femi's approach, and Rob, I think this is where you kind of kick some ass here, was your confrontation with Voulet and addressing him directly shortened that distance as much as possible. We did not let go, and didn't let go of the idea actually there's a deep injustice. And I think, just to spin off of what Rob just said last, was I think one of the few actions that's already happening. We exist in the topic of racism anyway. We exist in a very politicized area. And I think what the film does is it takes it away from this politicized topic and it just talks about the injustice. Quite essentially the injustice. And that goes back into helps me to reframe what the original messages were for BLM. No justice, no peace. Yes. And I think that's what it does. It steps away from you see in the news now, BLM is an anti-capitalist organization or anti-Western, whatever it wants. These people are framing it in different ways, and et cetera, et cetera. But actually, if you watch something like this, you just cannot avert your eyes, and you look, and you're forced to look at the injustice. Yeah. And only then are we able to kind of start making some actions. I think. Yeah. So in terms of like getting this film to people or groups, wow, it's a massive topic. There's a huge topic because it's something we've talked about quite openly with youth workers, quite openly with agencies and institutions about how do you not traumatize people with this kind of data and information. Some of it's brutal, as we saw from that film. Reliving that trauma is heavy and hard for people, and what. Yeah, and then we have to have this conversation. We have to have this conversation because
exactly.
I'm
going to have to cut you there because I really want to bring more people in as well, Fairs. And I know that we could end up having a conversation. Is there someone who'd like to just come on camera and say their question, put a question to Femi or the panel or Rob? Anyone?
Yes. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself there. Sorry.
Okay. Hi,
Olu. This is me, Olu. Hello there. Good evening, everyone.
Tell me a little bit about yourself,
so much.
Olu.
Oh no. Oh dear. I'm shy. Hello, everyone. My name's Olu. I train as a performer. I do some writing, and I help out on this project as well, on the Black Film Collective. My question really was, I'm really interested because you were talking about education, and it really, first of all, actually, sorry, excuse my manners, thank you so much for this film. It's incredible. I had a friend yesterday who watched it from the States and absolutely loves it and is spreading the word far and wide, who said that they had no idea about any of this. Myself as a Nigerian had no idea. It was really empowering for me, and it's incredible. So thank you, everybody, and I've learned loads. My question is, in terms of age groups, because you were just talking about trauma, which I thought was really interesting in terms of sharing this and using this as an educational tool, but also not just in kind of a school setting, but just in general. Have you had any thought or discussion about what the youngest age group would be showing a piece like this? Because it struck me, the kids who were watching it, and I'm going to probably share an opinion here, I'll be very quick, it's just that those kids who were sitting in school and learning, it struck me that they were particularly young. And so, I'm wondering, at what age would you say is, I don't want to use the word appropriate, but have you had thoughts around, have you had thoughts about it, about the age group? Thank you.
In terms of the actual age rating on the film, one of the things that came up with the BBC was the scene in the abattoir, which just after the length of the scene and how much it goes in. So actually, it's really interesting. all of the discussions about brutality against people and the images of Africans and rest is like, okay, well, we can kind of deal with that on a level. If there's animals being killed on screen, we might have to put an 18 plus on it and put it on after the watershed. That was the official discussions with the actual BBC and the rest. But you are right, the Nigerian children are there on screen, and they're teenagers, they're quite young, talking about how their grandparents were actively, how their grandfather's throat was slit by Voulet and his troops and the rest. Yes. And in school today, we're taught about the Holocaust. In my school, I was taught extensively about the Holocaust. So we should be taught about these other brutal things. And I personally don't think anything in the film is too difficult for teenagers to ingest and be confronted with at the very least. Yeah. What about you, Rob?
Actually, I saw a Moroccan friend of mine who watched the film about I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago and his 9-year-old son was coming in and out of the sitting room, seeing it on the computer, and he asked him lots of questions about it. And I just saw him at the weekend. This is like 2 or 3 weeks after he'd first seen it, and his son had just come to him on Saturday and said he wanted to talk more about Voulet and what was all that story that was in that film. I mean, I think maybe, so he's a 9-year-old boy growing up in Streatham. I think maybe it's difficult for 9-year-old children maybe to follow some of the kind of complexity of the narration and the actual story. But as I think Mohammed Fez said, it's a story that also you don't need to necessarily follow all of the details of the facts, because a lot of it we are trying to just give a much more emotional and sort of visceral and sensual kind of experience of just going through this space now in Niger and seeing how that kind of history overlays into the present. And I think young kids can get quite a lot from that. And I mean, I'm reluctant to sort of subject young kids to sort of listening to a load of Heart of Darkness and these kind of very complicated texts that you have to hear in this film. But on the other hand, it clearly spoke to my friend's son quite deeply, and I think there's a possibility that if handled carefully, and I do think in a educational setting it would have to be handled carefully. I mean, my daughter's a secondary teacher in Stoke Newington, so I'm sure there are lots of teachers who would be able to handle this kind of material kind of carefully with children. But I feel that quite young children could possibly get something from this film. But like I say, I think I don't know. I'm sort of talking aloud now. I'm not sure that I wouldn't necessarily say that it should be shown to 10-year-olds as a kind of matter of kind of policy or anything. But I certainly the children who are 15 who were in the film, they were about 15, most of those kids, 15 or 16. I mean, to be fair, they were talking about stuff which was very, very shocking, and it was shocking to us, to Femi and myself, when they went into that, because actually the lesson that they had was a lot more kind of disembodied. It was more about maps and numbers on the chalk numbers of 800 porters and 700 women captured and kidnapped and taken here and all this kind of stuff. But I don't know. I think we'll see when it goes to Niger. But I would say that if younger children can, if we feel that younger children can get something from it, then I understand what you're talking about with trauma totally, but I also feel that the reality is that what this kind of looking at the kind of colonial encounter, the first encounter, this particular story does, it encapsulates, is like, well, this is how Europe came to dominate Africa, and of course that violence is there, as we know, every day for everybody in their own experience. And we see it on TV, and we see the killings of George Floyd and so many other people in this country and in Europe and America. So it's not as if that violence is something that people aren't already, very, very exposed to on television sets all the time. But the point is not to is to somehow to use the trauma to find action, like what Onismo was saying. We've got to try to sort of
use it as
I think there's, pain is not a good teacher. Trauma is not a good teacher. My family comes from many of my family were killed in the Holocaust, and I know my dad never could watch those kind of films back in the 70s because he was too traumatized by it. And I understand that totally, but I also think that trauma is not necessarily a good teacher. We have to find a way of kind of coming out of that to work out, as Onismo said, I think, what is our action? What are our actions? What can we do together? How can we use a film like this to act together to change the way that the world is and the power is, even at whatever level we can do it, the most local level.
Right. I'm going to just quickly go to Fez, because I know he wanted to add to that very quickly. There's someone else also as well waiting to ask a question, so we do need to kind of move along.
It wasn't much, to be honest, Yvonne. It was just kind of more of a just extension of that topic of these tough topics we've got through in this film. And I think the only thing I wanted to add was actually, there's a fine line between transferring trauma and teaching about trauma.
Teaching trauma, yeah.
And
my son used to cry all the time.
And that's all it is. We just need
Yeah.
to have those conversations, and those conversations are not easy.
And they're not easy, and you can't avoid them. You just have to have them. And if they cry a bit, well, they'll thank you for it later on. It's a bit like vegetables. You don't like eating them, and you cry at breakfast time. But then years later, when you're big and strong. Anyway, can I just get the next question from the next person? Is there someone waiting to ask a question? No? Okay, well, I'm gonna read from yes, sorry, hi.
Hello.
Hi. Hi,
I
Hiba.
am Hiba. Yeah. I am Egyptian and I'm joining you from Cardiff.
Oh, lovely to have you from Cardiff. Lovely.
Oh yeah, thank you. Actually, I enjoyed the film very much. It was very, very enjoyable. So thank you for the film crew, and thank you for allowing us this opportunity. My question is about a phrase that was said by Femi in the film when he was listening to the woman on the record, the 70 years old woman, or I think she was from the 70s. She was tortured and she was telling her story, and she said, "The son of Europe did all this to me," and he was thinking, the son of Europe, and I am a son of Europe too, and he was feeling a little bit guilty about it. So my question to him is, how did you answer to this question? Because he asked the question and he never said an answer. He said, am I responsible too for what happened to her? He felt a little bit guilty because he has this duality of being raised in Europe but of African origin. How did he deal with it? Because this is an important question. How do you deal with this duality? How do you find peace within yourself with this duality? This is a question to whom you can answer.
Shukran, Hiba, Sharafana. I basically the question is still there to some extent, and it's explored throughout the movie. Cool. So, and it's a question which all the diaspora has to answer, not just the diaspora, because all of us who are here in Britain, right? I have a British passport, which means I can go to 164, 165 countries in the world. In this actual film, I use my Nigerian passport because Nigeria happens to be part of ECOWAS, as is Niger, so I could get there visa free. Niger is one of the few countries I can't go to visa free on a British passport. But generally, having my British passport is a lot more useful. Generally, growing up here, I have access to, I definitely have had access to electricity my whole life. You may have seen the lights coming on and off tonight a bit because I live on a boat now and use solar panels and it's the winter, but I still have electricity. And I've had a life of relative privilege compared to the people in Niger by virtue of me being here. And if I was in France and I had had electricity my whole life, then I would know that even though I was a black person in France, and even maybe if I was a black person in France who was disadvantaged compared to the general French population, my electricity may still be coming from the uranium which is being mined in Niger. And I think that this is a question which a lot of people in the diaspora and whose parents have been, some might say, lucky enough to make it over to the so-called developed world, ask themselves, especially when they're confronted with the stark reality of I'd never, when you go there and you're confronted with the stark reality of how it is on the ground. And I think for me, it is not, responsibility is probably the wrong word, because I'm not responsible in the same way that no one who lives now is directly responsible for that history. But in the same way as the people who live in France who are white are beneficiaries of that history, I am also a beneficiary of that history, and that adds a responsibility on me to make sure that I utilize the advantages that I have to help, whether that is through engaging in projects like this with the film, whether that's through remittance payments, whether that's through which in a way a form of reparations, in a way, even remittance payments, being like, okay, we're here and we have better money, so let's send money home. All of these kind of things, right, are a responsibility to utilize that privilege. And I think that is different to the responsibility that white Europeans have in a way, but also in another way, as someone who has benefited from being at the colonial metropole, as it were, I have a sense of responsibility. I'm not responsible for it, but I have a sense of an obligation almost, if that makes sense.
No, I completely get that. You know, as someone who's spent time in their mother country, you do have a sense that, you know, you feel quite rich, even though you feel in this country that you don't have anything. You suddenly go home and you realize that actually many of the existential things that we have, you know, we can't quantify it, but it's also incredibly important when you home. So there's one question that I have here. It's been condensed a bit. Basically, this person says, no mic or camera here, but just wanting to say, I found the film fascinating as well as troubling. Actual history should be taught, but also within the context of 18th, 19th century circumstances. Human history is full of atrocity. So what do we do other than reflect and understand, which I think we're trying to grapple with now anyway? Does anyone want to respond to that?
I think the thing that, and I'm not saying that this is what the asker is saying at all, but what's often raised is the idea that everyone did bad in the world. Africans have killed themselves. Some Africans enslaved themselves in the past. There was an empire. The Ottomans had an empire. The Romans had an empire. This, that, the rest. And so we need to everyone has been bad to everyone in the past, right? And it's kind of sometimes used as a way of saying this is no different. And I would say that the difference with the European colonialism of the kind of late 19th century, which led into now, is its proximity to the present and its extent. So yes, in a way, the Roman Empire made the world, and it's part of the reason that Europe became Christian. But the reason that Nigeria is Christian is because of the fact that the English went there. And I would say that the modern world as it is structured today, and the inequality that we see in the modern world today between the so-called West and the so-called developing world, is a direct result of these colonial missions. And it is not acknowledged in the same way in our history syllabuses as the Roman campaigns, as Attila the Hun. Yes, I think Mongolians need to take the guy off their banknotes because he was not a great guy. I think that the Turkish need to accept their role in the Armenian genocide. I think there's loads of other contentious denials of history that are not currently being looked at across the world. But I would say that the European colonial expansion, I mean, the British Empire was a quarter to half of the world, and then the French Empire again was a quarter to half of the world, and then the Portuguese, right? This was literally, the whole world was colonized by Europe, and not that long ago, i.e. the decolonization of these places was less than a century ago. People are still alive who were there during the decolonization struggles, and it has shaped the modern world as it is today. And I think that because of that, and because it's kind of uniquely, in a way, at least within the West, ignored and not addressed, there needs to be a spotlight shone on it. But I do think for sure England and France are not the only people to have ever done anything bad, and there's plenty of people who there's plenty of different issues which need to be addressed. And I know that some of Rob's old films even address European colonialism in Southeast Asia, not just in Africa per se.
Lovely.
You're muted, Rob.
Yeah, Rob, you've got to get you.
Just add one small thing, which is I just wanted to just bring out the point that's in the film about solar power. So as a sort of a theme in the film, you have this the idea that Niger is one of the sunniest countries in the world, and you have the scene at the end with Femi and the children doing their homework by the solar energy. In a way, it's a kind of a poetic, whimsical thing in the film, connected to the idea of heart of darkness, what is darkness and what is light and all that kind of stuff. But actually, and going back again to Onismo's kind of idea, which I keep going back to, is like, what's the action? I think it's really important, and this film doesn't really, it only begins to open up that question, is that we could end up going into, and the current questioner that you've just reported, Yvonne, is talking about how do we deal with the history and what do we do about it. It's kind of like we could go into a world where there's a new type of colonialism, which would be climate colonialism. I don't know if you know that Morocco is there's got one of the biggest it's got the biggest solar power station in the world, but actually there's quite a serious danger that will actually provide energy for Europe. And so I think that there are initiatives in America, there are initiatives here. In America, it's called the Green New Deal. Here we have the Green New Deal was trumpeted by the Labour Party in the last election, and I think even the Conservative Party is talking about some kind of green industrial revolution. But I do think that that's actually going to be something that's really, really important in terms of going forward, is how do we ensure that the Green New Deal, global Green New Deal, is something that is meaningful to everybody in this country in terms of good jobs and in terms of sustainability, but also doesn't drift towards a new kind of colonialism where countries like Morocco or Niger or Mali just get turned into places where the sun gets harvested, so that computers can run in Britain and America and France and Germany and so on. So I think environmental political action is something that's kind of really, really important, and to make that colonialism or anti-colonialism at the heart of that is going to be really important. Anti-racism, of course, as well. Anti-racism and anti-colonialism at the heart of any kind of environmental political action that we take part in. So I mean, this film is just quite whimsical in terms of that. It doesn't really have anything to say, but I would hope that it might help to sort of turn the historical debate into a kind of future-looking agenda.
Right, okay. I just want to quickly tell you that the response to that, Rob, is thank you for your answers. And Femi, do not forget the Chinese investment in the future throughout the world, a new form of colonialism. So, but we could go on.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, that's. I mean, there's a lot for us to unpack. I think in many ways I do want to sustain it to Africa, because I don't think people really realize just how big and what a wealth, you know, Africa has been to the whole world. And I think sometimes that gets lost. It's this exotic place with beautiful dark-skinned people. But anyway, I want to just say one thing to you, Femi, just about the music. I'm going to come to you, Fez. I wanted to talk about the music because when I first watched the trailer, it was the audio that drew me in, because I know Tunde very well. I know that he's a griot. I know that he comes from many generations of griots, and the music that you chose to put in it was I don't know, special in many ways. So I just wanted you to give us a minute and talk about how the music came about and how you feel it affected the film.
I think Rob's nipped off for a second, but I can talk. So actually, Tunde was recommended to Rob by a friend of mine who I had introduced to Rob.
Sorry, Rob.
Pardon?
No, it was Rob. It's kind of Rob's question because he was introduced to Rob. But please go ahead.
Doesn't look like he's there at the moment.
No.
But I had a friend who I did a play with actually, and Rob introduced him to Tunde's music, and then myself and Rob started to listen to Tunde's music and try it, because we were starting to listen to it as the film was being edited. So we would put it on different parts, and I was actually experimenting doing some actual music with it, some kind of poetry and spoken word stuff, which didn't make it to the final cut, but which may still happen in some kind of form at some point. And yeah, it worked. I mean, Tunde is of Nigerian heritage rather than Nigerian, and his work involves a lot of kora and isn't necessarily exactly the music of Niger, but at the same time, the film isn't just a film about Niger. It's a film about Africa. It's a film about West Africa. It's a film about colonialism, and the soft music that Tunde kind of introduced, and we didn't use some of his more very big, very intense pieces like the Kora Concerto. We chose often to use some of his smaller pieces. Worked very well at bringing out the emotive elements in the film. Rob, do you have anything to add about our collaboration with Tunde now that you're back? You're muted.
Sorry, somebody was running some water upstairs that was coming through the ceiling, so I just had to switch the tap.
Oh wow.
I'm not sure what you said, but I suppose
collaboration with Tunde.
Tunde's music was it kind of worked as like a kind of another voice, and it enabled, I think, for our film, it enabled maybe the emotional side of Femi's inner journey, in a process to sort of to be expressed in a way that sometimes words and just what we saw on his face and stuff we couldn't quite feel. And I think Tunde's music was, I mean, it was basically mostly his previously written music, although I think he did adapt a few bits to fit the film. But I think it was just, it really spoke very deeply to the same issue that has been being talked about. There's already been raised about, identity and a bit European and African and that kind of. But essentially, I think it brought an intimacy to the film, and it brought a kind of an internal emotional voice that I think we would have we essentially, it was almost, I can't imagine the film without it, even though actually we only became involved with him during editing. But I can't now imagine how we would have done the film without him. So thanks, Tunde.
Yeah, it's really beautiful music. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add? Because I guess it's, we've got 8 minutes left, And, you know, once you ask a question, it will go on for quite some time. So Abu, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. I've just been contemplating, reflecting on the essence of, you know, colonization, colonialism since the Berlin Conference. And then obviously the European powers had to go into Africa to physically take it. It was easy to carve it up on the map, on a circular or rectangular table, but to physically go in there and to change the dynamics, to split up countries and to split up tribes and, you know, clans, etc. My question basically is, as a director and a narrator of the actual film, what I noticed was the hospitality and the friendliness, yeah, of the Nigerian people, you know, the African people. And, you know, as a historian and even as a sociologist looking from a psychological perspective, one of the things that I know through a lot of the narrative, especially what's coming out of the Caribbean and what's coming out of North America within the Black community, people who are writing literature, they always focus that was the downfall of African people being too friendly, etc., you know, to the Europeans. And that's what made them make headways in taking over not just the land, but obviously taking control of the resources, the minerals, and the food commodities. How did you feel about the hospitality in relation to maybe hospitality you may or may not have received in European countries? You know, yourself, you know, because obviously you've traveled yourself, etc. You know, what was the difference? What was the essence? What made the African hospitality unique or different or special? You know, what's your views on that? You know, from your own personal experiences.
As Rob has mentioned, there had been 2 prior trips before this trip itself. So there was already, with a lot of the communities that we ended up interacting with, a priorly established bond. But then there was as well a lot of spontaneous interactions with people who I hadn't necessarily met before, and even the soldiers who you see in the film. And in the film, they're a very kind of ethereal, behind the scenes, scary presence, because they're kind of following me, making sure that I don't get killed by Boko Haram. But in reality, because obviously this film kind of is partly a narrative device, in reality, I bonded very, very well with the soldiers. And this was before coronavirus, so don't come at me. But I was sharing food with them. They were all eating out of one plate, basically. In the evenings, I was meeting them. I'd go out and meet people and even though in some ways, because it's a very Muslim country, there was a lot of privacy and there was a lot of there was a sense of kind of privacy, yeah. At the same time, there was definitely a sense of community and communal living that is missing, I think, in the kind of nuclear family-based approach that we have to life in the West, and seeing how people lived in these villages. I definitely think that there's something to be said for, not just in Africa, but in India and in a lot of places in the wider world. There's more of a sense of communal living, of community, and of it takes a village to raise a child, right? And I definitely think I saw some of that in Niger that I don't necessarily see in England.
I think also that people were really friendly.
Just before Rob comes in,
I'm sorry.
Just before Rob comes in, I just wanted just to add to it what you were saying, because I wanted to make that point, but I forgot. There was a part in the scene, obviously, my communication, my transmission went down, etc. Where was somebody offering you a wife or something? Was that part of the hospitality, or was that directly to you?
Well, that's the question, right? Whether that is, so that was the question posed in the film. Were they joking, or were they being serious? I think whether they were joking or being serious, it probably wasn't part of the hospitality. If they were joking, they were joking. If they were being serious, it's part of the idea of this rich guy with a camera crew coming from a Western country. If I sell my daughter, well, if I not sell, but if my daughter marries him, there's going to be a dowry of some sort, and maybe my daughter will end up in a Western nation and be able to. So I think it was the idea of including the scene Both was to bring out the question of are they joking, are they being serious, but also to bring home the stark reality of the economical divide and the fact that I mean, we didn't go in at all to child marriage. We didn't go in at all into that kind of stuff because it's not a film about how backwards Africa is. All right, it's a film about European colonialism. But still, I think that the point of including it was to drive home to drive home the same point we've made about I'm a European in a way. I'm black and I'm there as an African, but in another way, I'm a European. I'm an outsider, and it can be interpreted in a lot of ways. That scene, but it is a very
thanks, Femi. That's all I wanted
moment.
to know. That's brilliant. Yeah, just wanted to know that. Thanks. Sorry about that, Rob.
Oh, that's okay. No, that's fine. No, that's fine. All I was going to add was just something, a slightly different version, which is just that I think people were really welcoming to us on all the trips that we made and on the main trip that you see, because it was a real chance to tell the story, the history from the community point of view that had not really been told before. There have been books written about it. There have even been a couple of films about it, but not that hasn't the story from the community's point of view hasn't been told. And I think also something that was important that I think maybe if I was being critical about the film, I probably shouldn't be, but I mean, is that, you know, people were proud of the resistance that the Hausa people, because we're mostly dealing with Hausa communities, they were proud of the resistance that the Hausa communities put up against the French. Because what were the French doing there? They were just coming in and invading their town and taking their water, taking their land, taking their cattle, taking their food, taking their cola nuts, taking everything away from them, and they fought. And that's actually, I think, something that's, you know, unfortunately, you know, 90 minutes is a long film, but a relatively long film, but not long enough really to include the fact that actually it was the resistance by the Hausa people and other people, but particularly the Hausa people, that led Vule to become ever more violent. He was more brutal and disgusting and barbaric because the resistance was so intense, and he wouldn't. The French army, and this is not just true of France, but this is true in the other things that we looked at. You know, we mentioned the Sudan Omdurman battle, and you know, essentially Europe had this technology of machine guns and kind of a military technology. That was what, without that technology, the Hausa people would have won the battles in many of those cases, and colonialism may not have happened. You know, it was the technology that led that led Europeans, white Europeans, to think that they were not just superior in technology, but superior in some kind of morality and some kind of you know, biology and everything. You know, it was that was what it was. So I think people were very proud of being able to talk about the intensity of their resistance, and I do think that that's something that in other versions of this film that will be done for showing there will be other material that will be included that will probably emphasize the resistance more strongly than we were able to in this particular version for BBC, a television version.
With respect, Rob, there are many films about resistance, African resistance.
No, I know, sure, totally.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I get it. I mean, in fact, when I hear you, I actually realise that it's very like this. And in fact, when you look at African filmmaking, you know, particularly from, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s, it's all resistance films, really. But I want to speak with Andrew because he's had his hand up for a while. So Andrew, please share with us.
Yeah, it was just something, it's kind of digression, but it was mentioned when Rob was speaking about storytelling. And I think what you get from the film as well is the kind of rich tradition and the kind of cultural element of storytelling that is very kind of deeply embedded in African culture. Because I was thinking of this, there's numerous scenes where different people kind of recount speaking to an old man. You know, there's always that phrase like, I spoke to an old man, or I spoke to someone old that told me this about this time. And there's that sense of using stories and the communal element of it. There was times where there was many people in the community in the scene, or listening to one person speaking at a given time. And I think in a way, I almost, while I was watching, I was thinking, this is kind of a story that could have been told to me just from me being in Niger and listening, you know, without the film crew, without the kind of narrative, I would have still been able to get to the same destination in terms of the story, just from the rich kind of cultural tradition of the storytelling of the people. And that's, again, something I think that has almost been lost, or as we've moved towards a more modern world, and obviously living in the West in comparison to the global South, is that sense of kind of storytelling. And that is the way to keep your history alive, to keep your tradition alive, is the need to tell these stories, and not just in terms of on the big screen or the small screen, but also in terms of the vocalization of these stories, actually speaking to people about these kind of things. And that was an element of the film, like a theme, I guess, which we didn't get a chance to really kind of talk about in depth today, but something that really, really stood out to me is that kind of, that African tradition of storytelling. The way the Nigerians recounted and told their experiences was very, very moving, I think.
Indeed, and we also included Jibo Badji, who is a griot, who has died since, sadly, and is telling the story of Vule in the scene where you have them, and he's actually singing in Zarma rather than Hausa. He's one of the few points of the film where we have Zarma rather than Hausa as a language, because that was the main language of the people who were brutalized by him. But we have, I mean, there's the scene where I'm singing with the griots, but there's also the scene where you have a griot singing on his own. And so we tried to include that idea of storytelling through song, through communal talking and the rest. I think, because I think you're right. It's very important to have that. It's a very important thing to show through the medium of film as well.
Can you remember any of the songs, Femi? Can you sing anything for us today?
I wrote one of them. The one where I'm singing with the people going,
yes.
We're going to reveal Niger's history. They want to bury it under the ground. Zamu bayana wannan tarihin kasa kasa Niger. Lokacin vulezo akwe wahala ya cikin gaskiya mulkin Malaka. Mulkin Malaka is colonialism. And then Sunso Budeshi Karkashin Kasa Kama Kabuburwa Ama Bamu Yardaba, which is they want to bury it under the ground like a grave, but we won't allow it. And then it goes back to, we're going to reveal the history of the country of Niger. And they joined in. I think I got one word wrong when we did it. I said they want to hide it under the ground instead of bury it under the ground, but they all kind of figured out what I was trying to say.
Got it, lovely. I would have liked you to have sang that, just sang it at the beginning. If I'd have thought, I'd have made you just sing that just to open the proceedings. But thank you, it's really, really lovely. Gets me very emotional music. So I don't know how far we've got. It's 9 o'clock now. We're all still here. We still seem to have an audience. Is there, before I go any further, is there anyone that wants to say something to Femi and Rob? Because we only have them for tonight. We will meet Rob in Newport. We'll see him again, but we may not see. But we may not get this opportunity again. Is what I'm saying. So okay, Niz, nice one. Come in, Niz.
Thank you very much. This is for you, Femi, and something like even the song itself kind of ties into this kind of our ancestry and our kind of history and our heritage. Is because I think it's Gonu, when you were visiting the spirits within the trees, within the roots. I wanted to know kind of what lessons did you discover from our spiritual ancestry that is vital to kind of our current and our forthcoming kind of terrain. So what do you think? What did you learn, and what did you think is vital to kind of now that can apply to now?
One of the key things I saw about spirituality is the way that Niger's traditional, and I think it's a parallel between those of us who live in British colonized Africa as well, the traditional belief systems of Niger, the ideas that they had about Iskoki spirits living in the trees and the rest, despite the fact that they are in many ways having to go underground because of the mainstream Muslim religion in the country says that these things are juju, says that they are not, that they're witch magic, the rest. I remember even the soldiers and Hassan, one of my guides, said to me when we went to the seance, which ended up at the end of the film, it was actually earlier in the film, said to me, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. Well, one of the soldiers, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. This is juju is dark stuff. we shouldn't be here, because the people there were talking about spirits and trees and this, that, the rest. And I think it's always been an element of anti-colonial resistance, because again, as I said, it was in a way first colonized by, or at least not necessarily colonized, but there was the Arab expansion, which brought Islam to Africa, and then there was Christian colonialism, which brought Christianity to Africa. And yet you still have some of the indigenous beliefs which survive in the same way that in South America, indigenous beliefs were derided as paganism. In like traditional Yoruba beliefs in Nigeria, for a time, the beliefs in Shango, in the Orishas, and this, that, the rest were derided as paganism. And I think that, yes, you have the major world religions, which are now, in Nigeria, where I'm from, 50% is Muslim, 50% is Christian, supposedly, and there's a lot of tension between the two. However, the fact that traditional belief systems survive, whether or not I actually believe that there was a spirit living in the tree in the film, is itself a testament to anti-colonial resistance. And for me, that was why it was, as well as the fact that it was compelling, that was why it was necessary to include, because it's like, this is what people believe now, and it's what they believed before anyone came to dominate, and it's still surviving despite the fact that it's having in some ways to go underground in many cases. And it's always interesting to see how traditional belief systems thrive in countries that are sometimes as kind of deeply Islamic as Sudan, where a lot of this stuff again is derided as witch magic, and sometimes in countries that are as deeply Christian as I mean, even if you look at the Central African Republic and the kind of Christian Muslim fights that are going on there. And again, Islam itself has a role to play in anti-colonial resistance. When you look at, we talked about Algeria, the Algerian resistance, and you look at all of these North African countries, and you look at the Arab world, which again was colonized under Britain and under France. And so religion and spirituality is always really interesting when you look at it from a colonial lens. And I think one of the most difficult conversations sometimes I have with anti-colonial activists who are very, 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 very religious is to say, in some ways, how did Christianity come to Africa? How did Islam come to Africa? It came with the Spanish, with the French, with the English, etc. Right? And so sometimes we need to reconnect with our own spiritual traditions, which predate those major world religions.
I hear
that's where. Sorry, I was going to say that's where partly my question is what is vital, especially forthcoming now to our generation, because everything that we look at in kind of, or most things that we look at in the religious aspects of things tend to be what's already been there, embedded in our roots, embedded in our heritage, with just a kind of a switch or a shift. So then it's a way in terms of, even when we're looking at our language and how we interpret it, to interpret certain kind of connotations of religion, whether, like you were just saying, whether it's something like witchcraft or whether it's something like this magic that's all around us. Just because of that shift, we shy away from it. Just because of that shift, we remove ourselves from it, as opposed to kind of moving towards it more and more. What would you say is vital for us to proceed to move towards it, to gain a better understanding, so then we are getting a better understanding of our roots and getting back to our heritage?
Okay, I'm going to have to make this a very short answer because I'm being asked to wrap up now. So if you can just answer that like literally in 1 minute, that'd be fantastic. Be fantastic.
I think again,
a 3-hour answer.
Yeah.
Religion tends to be very, very, very touchy subject, especially with some of our older generations. And when people, but I think it's just being very, not being ashamed to reconnect with our traditions that predate kind of colonial rule, and not necessarily having to dogmatically say, okay, cool, I'm looking into Orishas and this, that, the rest. That means that I necessarily believe it. A lot of it is I don't necessarily hold to it. I don't think that Shango is doing this, but I understand that in accepting and writing about and in some ways practicing this stuff, I'm acting against colonialism. I'm reimagining and rebuilding and looking into look how many paintings and how many stories and how many cultural references are based off the Bible. Right? Why shouldn't I build cultural references and stories and this, that, and the rest, and comic books and the rest off Shango or off the Iskoki in the trees in Niger, right? It's kind of being unafraid of it and definitely not accepting those who tell us that it's heathenism and paganism and witchcraft.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody on the panel. I just want to, before I let you all go, I do want to let you know that we are conducting an audience survey to better understand the impact of our campaign. So please fill out the form to help us understand more about the African Apocalypse campaign. It's worked, and how it's worked, and about how successful you think it is in raising awareness of the issues of the film. So we will have got a link which is in the little message scroll at the back, and hopefully you've got access to that and you can fill that in and send it back. One last question from Missy One. It's not a question, it's more of a statement, but it's still a question in a way, rhetoric. The scene with the story of the spirit on the horse making the village disappear and the man on the white horse crossing the road. And she then says, spirit, so coincidence. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. And thank you all guys so much. Thank you, Femi, Rob, Andrew, Fez, Niz and Abu Bakar for your time and your energy tonight, and also to our audience, many thanks for coming along, and again for our sponsors, for Chapter and everyone else, and of course most of all to Priscilla from the New Black Film Collective, of which I am a part. Please do check out their website and their Facebook. The website is tnbfc.co.uk, or the New Black Film Collective if you're going to have a look on their Facebook page. So thank you so much, and good night to everybody. Have a lovely evening, and more power to your elbow, Femi and Robert, and hope to see your next film pretty soon.
Night.
All right, good night now. Bye-bye.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Where do I go?